Penn State football fans, welcome in to another edition of the Blue White Breakdown. I'm Bob Flounders, Johnny McGonigal joining me, and we're going to talk. You're starting to turn the corner, Johnny, when they start to release starting times for Penn State's 2023 schedule. Not that it's a slow week by any means, but for Penn State football. But I do think the fan base is starting to get excited. There's as we tape this, Johnny, 2 kick times have been announced. I believe it's just 2. Both of them primetime games. Penn State's opener with West Virginia is going to be a night game, 7:30 at Beaver Stadium on September 2nd. The more interesting news, and we've been talking about this, the whiteout game. What could it possibly be? What were the best scenarios? To me, when I looked at the schedule, I thought that the decision that they made earlier in this week probably made a lot of sense. So the whiteout game, which was announced on Monday, is going to be September 23rd against those darn Iowa Hawkeyes, an 8 p.m. kick. And it's noteworthy, I think, a little bit, Johnny. The game's going to be on CBS, a product of the new, TV negotiations. And a lot of people probably don't know this, but it's not the same old TV schedule when it comes to college football. There's been some new contracts handed out. CBS is going to be a prominent player. NBC is involved. But yeah, Johnny, just your thoughts. Was it a big surprise to you when you found out the Iowa game, September 23rd, was going to be at Beaver Stadium, was going to be the whiteout game at 8 o'clock?
No, Bob, it didn't surprise me. We touched on this briefly last week, I think, when we were talking about that West Virginia game, the season opener, being a primetime kick on NBC. And I thought that the whiteout would be the West Virginia game or the Iowa game. Yeah. Just looking at the rest of the home slate, the big game is the Michigan game, but you kind of have to assume that that's going to be big noon kickoff on Fox. And so if you're Penn State, if you're James Franklin, if you're the Nittany Lions, the admins that want the best environment possible for a whiteout, it's always been a night game. And James Franklin even talked about that last year about how, everyone wearing white, how it reflects in the night, just everything about the atmosphere just screams night game. And so I didn't think they would do the Michigan game for that reason. Mm-hmm. And I know some fans are a little bit upset about how, hey, Fox, just put it at night so we can have the biggest game. And that's just not how it works, especially now with Fox, NBC, and CBS. So interested to see, though, kind of how the rest of the college football schedule shakes out the weekend of the whiteout, because it's fully expected at this point that Notre Dame and Ohio State play on September 23rd. And that's looking like it could be a primetime NBC game. So Ohio State, Notre Dame, going up against Penn State, Iowa in that primetime slot. We'll see in terms of the viewership, how that all shakes out. But makes sense. I thought it was Iowa or West Virginia. And so 2 primetime games now for both of those, and should be 2 very interesting games at that.
Yeah, and just, when you look at Penn State's schedule and you look at its 12 games, you break down the first half of the schedule, first 6 games. West Virginia, Penn State fans, especially older Penn State fans, Johnny, I know all about West Virginia. Used to be a really big rivalry with Penn State decades ago. Not nearly the case. Not your same West Virginia Mountaineers. Pat White, Steve Slayton, Rich Rodriguez. They're not walking. They're not going to be in this game. West Virginia, I think they were 5-7 last year. They gave up a ton of points. That's a game where really you don't really look at that as maybe a big threat to Penn State. Then they get Delaware at home on the 9th. The 16th is going to be interesting. They're going to have to go to Champaign, Illinois to play Brett Bielema's team. Brett Bielema's team knocked them off 2 years ago in one of the bigger upsets in college football that year. Then comes Iowa right after that game, and then they got to go to Northwestern on the 30th, and they close out the first half of their regular season schedule. After a bye week, they get UMass. So really, when you look at the second half of the schedule's got, they got to go to Ohio State and host Michigan. They got Michigan State on the schedule. But when you look at the first half of the regular season schedule, the 2 games that jump out to me the most are obviously the road date at Illinois, because I think Brett has showed that you better not sleep on the Illini. He's done a very good job of turning that program around in a very short time. I'm sure they're going to have something for Penn State. I'm sure that's going to be a rugged game. And then to play Iowa the next week. Iowa's a little bit challenged on offense, and I don't know that's going to be any different this year. But those two games are really, I think, a big key to a quick start in 2023 in the first half of the season and maybe going undefeated going into the second half.
Yeah, and you mentioned that little gauntlet. I don't even want to call it a gauntlet, but that little stretch of Illinois, Iowa. I do think that they'll come out and they'll take care of business against West Virginia in the season opener. I saw somewhere that they're 17-point favorites or something. I mean, West Virginia is not going to be great this year. Delaware is Delaware. Thanks for coming out. Before that Iowa game, again, you mentioned Brett Bielema and what he's been able to do there at Illinois. They lose a lot of key pieces to that defense and offense. But, if Penn State can avoid some champagne problems in Illinois, that's a Taylor Swift joke, by the way.
I'm going to ask you about Taylor a little bit later in this. Don't you worry about it. You're not getting out of here without giving me your review of that concert. But go ahead.
But look, as long as they avoid issues in Champaign, and they're undefeated going into that Iowa game, maybe exact a little bit of revenge from the 2021 matchup. I expect this team to be 6-0. To start the season going into that Ohio State game. It would take like a major injury or a major slip up somewhere on this schedule. Maybe they come out and sleepwalk through an 11 a.m. local kick at Northwestern. If that ends up being the case, it feels like it always is. We'll see, but obviously, in terms of the front end of this schedule, the front half, the Iowa game was the biggest game. You could argue with that in West Virginia, so makes sense that it's a whiteout and everyone's gonna be juiced up for it. As you get later into the schedule, you don't need to get people riled up or juiced up for Michigan. That comes naturally, even at noon. So. Not surprised to see that that's not the whiteout. Yeah.
Speaking of riled up, this Iowa game, Johnny, because of the way it played out 2 years ago, I was at the game. The Penn State's fan base has long memories. They really do, as do most, huge fan bases. And that the Iowa game in 2021 was really the trigger point for Penn State's rapid decline in that year. They started the year undefeated. I think they were 5-0. Opened the season with a win, at Wisconsin, which is never easy to do. Their defense was pretty good throughout that year. It was really good in the Iowa game. They lost that game 23-20. They led 17-3 at one point out at Kinnick Stadium. But a couple things just to point out, and a lot of the Penn State fans, it's not anything they don't already know. Sean Clifford got hurt in that game in the first half. He had made some mistakes early, but he also they were producing points and they were kind of rolling on that Iowa defense. It was 17-3. He went out of the game and they replaced him with Taquan Roberson, and he just was not really ready for that environment. It was also kind of the beginning of the end for Taquan Roberson as a Penn State quarterback. They would lose. I think they came off a bye. They would lose the next week to Illinois. What was 5-0 became 7-6. But I think James, after that game, he kind of looked at developing the quarterback room a little bit differently. He kind of acknowledged that, Christian Veilleux, who was the number 3, the more they looked at him after Sean got hurt, the more it became apparent that he was actually the second best quarterback, I think, in the depth chart. He played a little bit. He beat Rutgers when Sean Clifford got sick on the flu day. But I think after what happened at Iowa, I think James decided, hey, we got to have a number 2 ready to go. We have to know who the number 2 is, and he's got to be ready to be competitive in games. And I think you saw that play out last year with him giving the 5-star Drew Aller, a lot of early playing time. But the other thing I would say, Johnny, is that was a nasty, nasty game in Iowa. Hot day. Penn State was in control early. It was a warm day. Penn State had some defensive players go down during the course of that game, and they were getting booed by the Iowa crowd. I think Kirk Ferentz piled on after the game, saying it was a little bit fishy to see them stay down. The irony, Johnny, is that Iowa's offense wasn't even explosive that year, but they were trying to run a tempo offense, and then I guess he tried to intimate that they were trying to slow down this Iowa juggernaut. My point is that the Penn State fan base, I don't think, will forget their players getting booed on the field. And also, not that there's a lot of Penn State players that played prominent snaps in that game. Curtis Jacobs, I think, was a starter in that game. They're not going to talk about it, but I guarantee you the coaching staff and Penn State's players are aware of how they were treated out at Iowa, and that'll add fuel to the fire. I think the Penn State fan base is really going to be excited to see if Penn State can kind of step on these guys' throats.
Yeah, it's interesting. After that game, it was a top 5 matchup. Penn State and Iowa were, they were 3-4, and really after that game, though, neither team did much of consequence. I mean, Penn State ended up going 7-6, and the injury to Clifford played into that, and how that season kind of unraveled. And then Iowa, they won 10 games, but they ended up getting blown out by Michigan in the Big Ten title game, and it's like, 42-3. So how much of a great team was that, really? And what really everyone remembers is what you mentioned, the booing, and it really started. It was like this national story for a week after. I mean, I remember just asking, because I was covering Pitt at the time for the Post-Gazette, and asking Pat Narduzzi about just a player that Pitt had injured from the week before, and he was like, "Oh no, like he's fine. He had cramps. He's good." A lot of talk about cramps and faking injuries this week, and he started defending James Franklin just out of the blue. Now, I think there is some history there between him and Ferentz when he was at Michigan State, but nonetheless, this was a talking point throughout the entire country. And it's going to be interesting to see, how it's brought up before the game. Obviously both coaches, Ferentz and Franklin, will be asked about it. They probably won't be asked about it. They'll be asked about it more than once, for sure. And there's definitely some players on this Penn State roster that will remember that game. And there's certainly our emails right now are blowing up, Bob, on Teams. If the listeners could hear that. No, but there's definitely Penn State fans that remember that. I mean, this is going to be a juiced environment. I'm expecting Iowa to get booed running out of the locker room pretty heavily. I mean, the away team is always booed, but more than usual. It was just a weird scenario when fans are booing, and Ferentz said, "Oh, they smelled a rat." Like, who says that?
Yeah.
What a bizarre statement.
He hasn't had a good run in recent years, Kirk, on the national scene for a lot of reasons. There's been a lot of stuff written about the Iowa program and some of the ways he's handled that program. Johnny, I have to say this: the game's going to be in September. It's going to be, it's usually pretty warm in September, even in State College. I'm totally serious when I say this. I really hope an Iowa player does not go down with cramps early in this game, because they're going to get it, and it's not going to be really fair to the players. But at the very first sign of anything like that, there's going to be 109,000 people that are going to get really, really unhappy. It's only been 2 years. It's going to be fresh in everyone's minds. It was a game that really helped shape Penn State's 2021 season in the wrong way. And I don't understand what Kirk Ferentz was thinking to say something like that. And he did do it. Your reference, that's not the first time he's done that. I think Iowa played Michigan State almost 10 years earlier, and I think Narduzzi was the DC, and there was some talk. What is to be gained by that? I don't understand that guy. I really don't. I think he's one of the longest tenured coaches in college football, but it just seems like the longer he stays, the more everything around him is kind of a little almost in the negative. I don't know what to make of this guy. I mean, he's got his son as like the OC, and there's some nepotism involved there. So he's got enough issues within that program to worry about than maybe going out of his way to incorrectly bash another program. So yeah, it's going to be, the game might not be wildly entertaining, but it's a game I think Penn State can really, this is going to be a game they're going to be very motivated to play. Yeah,
you mentioned Ferentz's son, Brian Ferentz, being the offensive coordinator. I mean, talk about a joke of a coordinator. They averaged 17 points per game last year, ranked I think 123rd out of 130 FBS teams. Somehow not last in the Big Ten, but nonetheless, not very good. And that actually prompted Iowa's athletic director, because he was getting pressured so much by the fan base and the donors to do something about this, because clearly Kirk Ferentz isn't going to fire his own son. That basically they have a contract stipulation now that Iowa has to average 25 points per game this year and win 7 games. And if they don't do that, then Ferentz is out as the offensive coordinator. Now, defensive and special teams touchdowns count towards this average. So, like, he could still suck as an offensive coordinator and keep his job. But you know what, though? There is actually, like, a slight reason or two for optimism around this Iowa offense. Cade McNamara, quarterback from Michigan, who was quarterbacked them to the 2021 Big Ten title game and title win. He's their quarterback now. He transferred over to Iowa in the offseason. They've got a transfer wide receiver coming in from Ohio State. They've got a tight end. Stop me if you heard this before, Bob, but Iowa has a tight end that they're excited about.
Yeah.
Luke Lachey, Lashley. I don't know how you want to pronounce his last name, but he's good. So, they've got some pieces on offense. Who knows if Brian Ferentz can do anything with them? But they're going to have a tough defense. They're going to have good special teams, and they're typically a tough out. So it should be a good game. And really, you look at the schedule in terms of defenses, and like I said, that the Iowa defense, they lose some pieces in Riley Moss and Jack Campbell, but you expect them to have a nastiness about them.
Sure.
Maybe Illinois would pose a difficult test too, but those 2 games should be early tests for Drew Aller and Penn State offense.
Yeah, Van Ness, I think it was a first-round pick, although he kind of flashed late in the year. But, Jack Campbell was the guy, I believe, that knocked out Sean Clifford in that game 2 years ago with a nasty hit on a blitz. But, he's now a Detroit Lion. But it's weird. The thing about watching Iowa as somebody who only gets to see him like every other year is I really get a kick out of watching the way they play on defense, because you got to earn it against that defense. They don't make any mistakes. Their secondary is as opportunistic as it comes. They just seem to have a knack for developing, whether it's a 3-star or a low 4-star by the time they leave Iowa, especially on the defensive side. These guys they're all really NFL caliber players. I've always enjoyed watching the Iowa defense find different ways to really slow down, talented offenses. They're going to make you go 80 yards. They're not going to make a lot of stupid mistakes. If they get you in 3rd and long, chances are if you put the ball up for grabs, they're going to come down with it. Also, they're really good at developing offensive linemen, but the bugaboo has been really the quarterback play, and we'll see how it works out. But I just think that Penn State's defense, with what they have coming back, it's a good matchup for Penn State's defense. And I do think what happened 2 years ago is going to matter a little bit in this game. And no matter what James Franklin says, he remembers the way his program was treated in that game and what was said about his program by the coaching staff, and the defensive coaches are going to remember that as well, because it was a lot of defensive players, I think, were the players that went down in question. And Jaquan Brisker was a guy who had, I think he had a shoulder injury. He was legit injured early for most of that season, played in pain. And when a guy like Jaquan Brisker goes down, Johnny, it's because he's really hurt. Okay, guys, had a couple technical difficulties here on the Blue White Breakdown. Johnny, we're kind of closing up our thoughts here on the whiteout game in Iowa and just all the things. One of the things I just wanted to close with is we talked about all the nonsense from the 2021 game and the accusations about Penn State players, staying down to limit, the explosiveness and the up tempo of this Iowa offense that can't score points, which is really, think about it, it's just a dumb argument. But I just think that Penn State's going to remember what happened 2 years ago. And even if they don't have a lot of players who played significant snaps in that game, James Franklin's going to remember it. The defensive coaches are going to remember it, and it's going to be there's going to be a little fuel to the fire. I do enjoy watching Iowa's defense play. They're great. They're great at what they do. They're going to be missing some good players, but it's really going to come down to what kind of a fight can Iowa's offense put up against, I think, one of the better defenses in the country this year. And I'm sure since it was the Penn State defense that kind of got singled out in the 2021 game for maybe staying down. It's not going to take much for them to be motivated coming into this game. I think this is a great, if you're a Penn State fan and you remember what happened 2 years ago, this game got a lot more exciting, right? If this game was going to be played at noon, on ESPN or wherever it was, you'd be excited for the game. But I think the fact that it's Iowa primetime, I do think, and this is definitely right. This is definitely a winnable game for Penn State. So I do think it's a shame it's not going to be Michigan for the whiteout game, but you got to play the hand you're dealt. And I think when you look at their schedule, I think the Iowa game made a lot of sense.
Yeah, and this is teed up like you alluded to. This is just teed up for a big Penn State defensive performance. Yeah. Manny Diaz wasn't the defensive coordinator when they were out at Iowa 2 years ago, but a lot of these players on the defense, like you mentioned, Curtis Jacobs, older players, will remember that game and the fallout from that game and just how that loss affected their season on the whole. And like we mentioned earlier, Clifford getting hurt there really just kind of screwed up a rhythm because they were up 17-3 in that game. And who knows what they would have done from that point forward if they had won that game and all that. But man, with a whiteout crowd and an offense that, like I mentioned, has some better pieces this year, still early in the season in September, probably gelling together. Man, like I expect players like Dennis Sutton and Chop Robinson and, Disa Isaac, Abdul Carter, for those players to just tee off. It really is just kind of served up on a platter for those guys. I really think the entire front end of the schedule is served up that way because I don't think West Virginia is going to have much offensively that'll worry you. Delaware is Delaware. Illinois, kind of similar. Iowa, the fact that Iowa might be the best offense in the first 4 games of the season is telling you something. Northwestern was 1-11 last year, and then UMass. This defense could really get on a roll going into that Ohio State game at the Shoe on October 21st, and at that point, who knows? So this team should be. I think this team should be 6-0 after the start of the season. Again, barring injuries. We're talking about this in May. But yeah, the Iowa game is going to be a big one, and fans will definitely be revved up for it. That's for sure.
Yeah. Little housekeeping here at PennLive, the blue-white breakdown. But just a reminder, we had talked last week, Johnny, about your conversation with Michael Maude, who is very, very big into Penn State's football NIL push. Michael Maude, one of the great linebackers to play at Penn State in the last 25 years. He's now an assistant coach at Trinity High School in the Harrisburg area. The head coach is his teammate, Jordan Hill. Excuse me. Jordan's going to kill me if he hears this because I know Jordan very well. But I was trying to memorize who is sponsoring something. I got ahead of myself. But yeah, Michael Maude and Jordan Hill are coaching at Trinity, but he's also a big part of Penn State's NIL push. You had a chance to talk to him recently about a story about the NIL efforts. But in addition, Michael Maude is also going to be kind of the featured speaker at PennLive's High School Sports Awards Banquet, which is coming up May 25th. So only a couple weeks away. It's going to be at the Penn Harris Hotel Convention Center in Camp Hill, kind of a suburb in Harrisburg, 5 to 7 p.m. May 25th, Penn Harris Hotel Convention Center. Michael's going to be a speaker. And I was also said, if you want to, I could also say the banquet is being sponsored by Renewal by Anderson of Central PA and UPMC. I got that out of the way, Johnny. I only got Jordan Hill mad at me a little bit because I think he thinks I forgot his last name. Not the case, Jordan. You're always in my thoughts, buddy. But Johnny, hey, before we wrap up this edition of the Blue White Breakdown, I don't know if there's a lot going on the recruiting trail. If there is, you can give us an update. But if there is no update, I'm going to have to ask you about two things. Game 7 for the Sixers, but on a more positive note. I just wanted to get your thoughts just on. I know you got a chance to go to one of the Taylor Swift shows in the Philadelphia area, and I'm sure it was a huge success. But if there's no recruiting news, let's get into like how your weekend went, good and bad.
Yeah, just one small piece of recruiting news. Michael Van Buren, he's a 2024 quarterback, 4-star, key target for Penn State. It looked like Penn State was going to be the favorite early on. That has since switched to Oregon. He's making his announcement this weekend. I believe it's Saturday, on where he'll be going to college. So just something to keep an eye on. If you're a Penn State fan, like I said, all signs right now are pointing to Oregon. But Penn State would love to have him in the 2024 recruiting class, which is ranked 6th nationally, but does not have a quarterback yet. So just keep an eye on that. The Sixers, it was just embarrassing, to be honest with you. And look, after Game 6, I was talking to my friends, talking to family, and they had an opportunity winning Game 6 at home. They were up 2 with 4 minutes left. They had a couple possessions there where they could have gone up 4 or 5. They didn't take it. Tatum did his thing late. Yeah. And when they lost Game 6, I knew they were going to lose Game 7. I was not confident whatsoever. I didn't think they'd get smoked that bad. I didn't think they'd put up 10 points in the third quarter. Yeah. But you know what? It's tough because the difference in mental toughness between those two teams were on full display. A team in the Celtics that made the finals and has that experience. And as much as I love Joel Embiid, he just hasn't done it in the playoffs. James Harden has never done it in the playoffs, on a consistent basis. And it's just frustrating. So we'll see where they go. Whether James Harden comes back, whether they bring back Doc Rivers, who knows? But I was watching that game in Xfinity Live down in South Philly while a Taylor Swift cover band was playing in the background. And for like 30 minutes, I was miserable. I was just down bad. But then I switched. I was just like, you know what? I'm going to see Taylor Swift tonight. We're gonna flip the switch. And Bob, she was incredible. I'll say that. So that was my second time seeing her. Saw her the last time she came to Philly. And she was very good. It was a nonstop 3-hour performance, which you don't normally see that these days with performers just playing for 3 hours straight. It was very good. It was awesome.
Yeah, we didn't see it. We didn't see it in Boston, right? They couldn't even play nonstop for 2 hours. I'm talking about exactly. The one thing I was just saying, like I'm not. So I don't watch the Sixers. I did watch Game 7, and I think at halftime they had a slight lead. The only thing it was stunning to see the energy level of Tatum throughout that game during his 50-point performance. He was constant motion in that game. The guy he seemed like he got stronger as the game went on, and it just looked to me like Embiid. I don't know if he had nothing left in the tank. He was just playing the game on the perimeter. He couldn't move. And, you're right. Mental toughness went a long way towards determining that game. They wanted it more. It's unfortunate to go to a Game 7 against an opponent like that. And just the last 2 quarters of the game, it just didn't look like they were very interested in being out there. But you know what? The Celtics are a good team. Congratulations. At least you got out of it with seeing Taylor. And hopefully that'll be – I don't know if she tours every year, but every other year, whatever it is, I'm sure you're always going to try and get a chance to see her, Johnny. So look, we're almost in June, and you don't have to worry about the Sixers. You can just focus on those Phillies and a fired up Bryce Harper, who showed a little bit more energy in a loss at Colorado over the weekend than the Sixers did in Game 7.
Well, that's what I texted my buddies. I'm like, Bryce Harper, the only Philly athlete with any heart on Sunday. God damn, it was just such a bad game. It's gonna be a cruel summer for Doc Rivers, Bob.
But you know what? It's you get a team down. You got a Game 6 at home. You can finish them. You don't finish them, and then you're a no-show in the second half of Game 7. He's gonna have to address that, and I think management's gonna have a pretty interesting decision regarding Doc Rivers. His record, I think I saw the stat. not great in game sevens as a coach. I think he's like 10-16 or something like. It's something weird. It's way more losses than wins, and it's not going to get it done, Johnny. So hey, I know you got to get out of here, guys. We'll be back on the blue-white breakdown a little bit later in the week. But Johnny, Penn State, Iowa, the blue-white breakdown. It's going to be the whiteout game, September 23rd. 2 night games, real early in the season for Penn State. I think the word's out about this team. I think they're a primetime team. I mean, that might not be the end of the night games for Penn State, but this is a team I think that a lot of people are starting to figure out that, hey, this is going to be, if it's year 10 for James Franklin, this is his best year. Really, the 2016 season was great, but I don't want to say they snuck up on the Big Ten, but after they got waxed early at Michigan, they kind of did a little bit. They're not sneaking up on anybody this year, but they might have the talent to just back it up.